Monkey and heat on the parallel bars. Yeah!
In the glittering, cutthroat world of 1980s television, one man reigned supreme. His name was Johnny Carson, and his desk on The Tonight Show wasn't just furniture, it was a throne. For 30 years, he was the undisputed king of late night, a cultural force who could make or break a career with a single nod. And for a golden era, his queen, his heir apparent, was a brash, hilarious woman named Joan Rivers. They were more than host and guest. They were mentor and protege, a comedic father and his favorite daughter. Their on-screen chemistry was electric. Carson's cool Midwestern charm was the perfect launchpad for Rivers' chaotic New York energy. He handed her a career, and she gave him some of his biggest laughs. It was a friendship that defined an era of television. And then in a flash, it was gone. You've probably heard the story that a single joke got Joan Rivers permanently banned by her mentor, Johnny Carson. For nearly 3 decades, a wall of silence stood between two of comedy's greatest legends. A silence so absolute that Carson would never speak her name in public again. But here's the truth. The joke was never the real story. The shocking reality involves a secret multi-million-dollar deal, a phone call that ended a 20-year friendship in seconds, and a sense of betrayal so deep it would haunt Joan Rivers for the rest of her life. This is the real story of why the most powerful man in television erased Joan Rivers from his world, triggering a chain of events that led to professional ruin, personal devastation, and one of the most tragic chapters in Hollywood history. 2. Understand how deep the betrayal cut, you have to understand how high the friendship soared. Before the feud, there was the golden era. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was an American institution. Getting on The Tonight Show was a rite of passage, but getting the ultimate prize, an invitation to the couch next to Johnny after your set, was a coronation. It meant you'd made it. For years, Joan Rivers was a struggling comic in New York. By 1965, at 31, she was broke, divorced, and had been told her career was over. A disastrous early appearance on The Tonight Show under a previous host had set her back. But a second chance, this time with Carson, changed everything. On February 17, 1965, a nervous Joan Rivers walked onto Carson's stage. Her performance was raw and electric. She talked about things women weren't supposed to, with a self-deprecating wit that was both shocking and hilarious. The audience roared. More importantly, Johnny laughed. When her set was over, he waved her over to the coveted couch. As she sat down, Carson leaned in and said the 6 words that would change her life forever. "You're going to be a star." And just like that, she was. As Rivers herself would later say, "He handed me my career." Club bookings poured in, and she became one of Carson's most beloved guests, appearing dozens of times over the next 2 decades. Their dynamic was magic. Carson, the perfect straight man, would tee them up, and Joan, with her "Can we talk" catchphrase, would knock them down. He was her biggest champion, and their relationship was so close he even introduced her to the man who would become her husband, the producer Edgar Rosenberg. By 1983, their bond was official when Carson made Rivers the permanent guest host of The Tonight Show. While the role of guest host already existed, she was the first to hold the permanent title, an unprecedented move that cemented her as the queen of late night and Carson's undisputed number 2. She was fiercely loyal, turning down offers from other networks because she felt a deep allegiance to Johnny. She saw him as a father figure. To the world, and even to Joan, their partnership seemed unbreakable. But just beneath the surface, a rebellion was brewing. By the mid-1980s, Joan Rivers was a phenomenon. She was a best-selling author, a Grammy-nominated comedian, and the most famous female comic on the planet. Her guest hosting gigs on The Tonight Show were huge, sometimes even pulling in ratings that beat Carson's. She had climbed the ladder, only to find she'd hit a glass ceiling, and on the other side was Johnny's desk. Whispers started circulating at NBC. Johnny Carson, after more than 2 decades, might be thinking about retirement. His 25th anniversary in 1987 seemed like a logical endpoint. Naturally, talk turned to his successor. As permanent guest host, Joan assumed she'd be at the top of the list. She was wrong. In 1986, an internal NBC memo listing about 10 comedians as potential Carson replacements was leaked. Joan Rivers' name wasn't on it. To make matters worse, not a single woman was on the list. It was a brutal, public snub. At the same time, her contract negotiations with the network soured. While Carson had signed a new 2-year deal in 1985, NBC only offered Joan a 1-year extension. The message was clear. They didn't see her as the future of The Tonight Show. They saw her as a temp. Rivers felt disrespected and undervalued. She'd given 2 decades of her career to NBC and to Johnny, and she felt that loyalty wasn't being returned. Now 53 years old, she began to wonder if this was as good as it was going to get. The idea of forever being the guest host, forever keeping someone else's chair warm, was starting to feel less like an honor and more like a trap. It was at this exact moment of doubt that a new player entered the game. A brand new 4th network, Fox, was being built by media titan Rupert Murdoch. They needed a star to launch their late-night programming and take on the king himself, Johnny Carson, and they had their eyes on his queen. The offer from Fox was, in Joan's words, a knockout. They didn't just want her to host a show, they wanted to build their entire late-night block around her. They offered her The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, a title that would make her the first woman to ever host her own late-night talk show on a major network. The money was staggering for the time. A 3-year contract reportedly worth $10 to $15 million, far more than NBC was paying her. But the deal came with a critical and ultimately fateful condition. Fox agreed to hire Joan's husband, Edgar Rosenberg, as the show's executive producer. Edgar was her manager and her fiercest protector, but he was also known to be difficult. It was a massive concession that NBC would never have made, but it helped seal the deal for Joan. This was an opportunity not just for her, but for her family. Now came the agonizing decision. Accepting meant competing directly with Johnny Carson, her mentor and friend. But she believed that Johnny, a shrewd businessman himself, would understand. After all, other Tonight Show regulars had launched their own shows with his blessing. Here, Edgar's advice proved catastrophic. He insisted she keep the Fox negotiations an absolute secret. His logic was based on a brutal Hollywood truth. If she told Johnny about the offer before the ink was dry and the deal fell through, she could be left with nothing, no Fox show and no more Tonight Show. So, under a cloak of secrecy, Joan and Edgar finalized the contract. Her plan was to call Johnny the moment the deal was official, before it was announced to the public. She wanted him to hear it from her, to explain her reasoning. She naively believed a 20-year friendship could survive one tough business call. She had no idea she was about to make a call that wouldn't be a conversation, but a verdict. The news leaked before Joan could make her calls. Hollywood is a town built on whispers, and a secret this big was impossible to contain. Some reports say an executive tipped Carson off. Others say he saw the announcement on TV. Regardless of how he found out, one thing is certain: he didn't. Hear it from Joan Rivers. For a man who valued loyalty above all else, this was the ultimate sin. By the time Joan finally picked up the phone, it was too late. The damage was done. The story of that call has become a dark legend, recounted by Rivers many times. According to her, the conversation went like this. "Johnny, it's Joan. I want to talk to you," she began. She told him she was leaving to host her own show on Fox. There was a pause. Then came the sharp, definitive sound that would echo in her memory for decades. Click. He had hung up on her, stunned, Thinking it had to be a mistake, she called back immediately. "Johnny, please, just let me explain." He hung up on her again. The man who had discovered her, mentored her, and laughed with her for 2 decades refused to even hear her out. He slammed the door on their friendship and bolted it shut forever. To make things worse, Carson later publicly claimed he never received a call from her at all, adding another layer of poison to the wound. To Carson, this wasn't just competition. It was the perceived deception. It was the fact that she was on his show, laughing with him, just the week before her deal was announced without saying a word. He felt she had used his stage and his trust while secretly plotting to become his rival. It was a personal betrayal, and for the intensely private and notoriously unforgiving Johnny Carson, it was unforgivable. He never spoke to her again. He'd see her in restaurants and turn his back. The friendship wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. The fallout from that phone call was immediate, brutal, and would send Joan Rivers' life into a downward spiral that nearly destroyed her. The story of how one man's grudge brought an empire to its knees is a shocking lesson in Hollywood power. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most infamous feuds. Johnny Carson's revenge wasn't loud. It was cold, silent, and ruthlessly effective. He didn't issue a press release. He just made it clear through his powerful producers what the new rules were. The message, whether spoken aloud or just understood, was terrifyingly clear. Any celebrity who appeared on The Late Show starring Joan Rivers would be blacklisted from The Tonight Show, permanently. In an era before the internet, a ban from Carson was a career death sentence. The effect was catastrophic. A-list stars who were friends with Joan suddenly stopped returning her calls. Publicists, terrified of angering the king, steered their clients away, while her premiere on October 9, 1986, featured big names like Cher and Elton John. The well of A-list talent quickly ran dry. The show itself struggled. As a new network, Fox didn't have a strong national presence, and many local stations, out of loyalty to Carson, refused to air the show at all, leading to weak ratings from the start. The pressure was immense. Adding to the chaos were clashes behind the scenes. Joan's husband, Edgar Rosenberg, as executive producer, reportedly argued constantly with Fox executives and staff. His abrasive management style created friction and instability. As ratings slid, the network's patience wore thin. In May 1987, Fox delivered an ultimatum: fire your husband. For Joan, this was an impossible choice. Edgar was the man who had managed her entire career, the man who had encouraged her to take this risk. Her loyalty was absolute. She refused. In response, Fox fired them both. On May 15, 1987, just 7 months after her triumphant debut, Joan Rivers hosted her final episode of The Late Show. She was publicly humiliated, fired from the show that was meant to be her crowning achievement. She had sacrificed her relationship with the most powerful man in television for a dream that had turned into a nightmare. She was now an outcast, blacklisted by Carson and discarded by Fox. The professional ruin was complete. But the personal devastation was just beginning. The failure of The Late Show was a cataclysm that ripped through Joan Rivers' life. The public humiliation and financial strain put an unbearable weight on her marriage. Edgar, who had suffered a major heart attack in 1984 and was prone to depression, saw the show's failure as a deep personal disgrace. He had negotiated the deal. He was the producer. In his mind, he was to blame. Joan later said the firing from Fox broke him. He spiraled into a deep depression, refusing her pleas to get help. The strain became toxic. In a desperate attempt to save them both, Joan asked for a trial separation. A few months later, in August 1987, Edgar checked into a Philadelphia hotel room. Alone and consumed by the humiliation inflicted by Fox, he took a fatal overdose of prescription pills. He was 62. He left 2 suicide notes, one for Joan and one for their daughter, Melissa. The news shattered Joan's world. Her partner of 22 years was gone. In the grief-stricken aftermath, her relationship with Melissa fractured, with her daughter temporarily blaming her for her father's death. Her Vegas contracts were canceled. Then came the final blow. Sorting through Edgar's affairs, she made a horrifying discovery. Due to a series of disastrous investments, the fortune she thought she had was gone. In its place was a mountain of debt, which Joan herself stated was $37 million. She was 54 years old, a widow, estranged from her daughter, a pariah in her industry, and millions in debt. The weight of it all became too much. As she later confessed, there was a moment when she sat alone with a loaded gun, contemplating ending her own life. She had lost her mentor, her show, her husband, her daughter's trust, and her fortune. All in the span of one horrific year. It was the lowest point of her life. In the wake of unimaginable tragedy, Joan Rivers did the only thing she knew how to do: work. With staggering debt to pay, she hit the road, taking any stand-up gig she could get. Slowly, she began to reinvent herself. In 1989, she launched a syndicated daytime program, The Joan Rivers Show, which became a huge success and won her a Daytime Emmy. She created a billion-dollar fashion and jewelry empire on QVC, proving her deep connection with her audience. She mended her relationship with Melissa, and the two became an iconic duo on the red carpet for E! Joan Rivers, the ultimate survivor, clawed her way back to the top, but one door remained firmly shut. The ban from The Tonight Show held. Johnny Carson retired in 1992 and passed away in 2005, never having spoken to Joan again. His successor, Jay Leno, upheld the ban. He later explained he did it out of respect for Johnny while he was alive, and after Carson's death, it had just become awkward. For 26 years, an entire generation grew up never seeing Joan Rivers on the show that made her a star. Then, in 2014, the impossible happened. A new host, Jimmy Fallon, took over The Tonight Show. Fallon, having no part in the old feud, saw the injustice of the ban. On his very first episode, February 17, 2014, 49 years to the day of Joan's legendary debut, he had her make a surprise cameo. A few weeks later, she returned as a full guest for the first time in decades. When she walked out on stage, the audience gave her a thunderous standing ovation. Fallon pulled out a photo of her and Johnny from that fateful night in 1965. The moment was a bittersweet closing of a circle left open for far too long. "It's very special for me to be back, seriously," she told Fallon, before immediately launching into a typically outrageous joke. The ban was over. She was home. Tragically, it would be a brief homecoming. Just 5 months later, in September 2014, Joan Rivers passed away at the age of 81. The feud between Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers is more than a celebrity falling out. It's a story of ambition, loyalty, pride, and profound betrayal. For Johnny, it was about loyalty. He was a man who valued allegiance above all else, and in his eyes, Joan's secrecy was an act of treason from someone he considered family. His silence was his weapon, and he wielded it with devastating precision to the very end. For Joan, it was a story of ambition and survival. A pioneer in a man's world, she dared to want more. She made a calculated risk, based on her husband's advice and her own naive belief that her friendship with Carson was stronger than her ambition. She was wrong, and she paid an unimaginable price, losing not just her mentor, but her career, her fortune, and tragically, her husband. Years later, Joan mused about what Johnny should have done. She said after she was fired from Fox and after Edgar's suicide, Johnny should have invited her back onto The Tonight Show and simply said, "Where you been?" It would have been an act of grace that healed a decades-old wound. But that just wasn't Johnny Carson's way. In the end, two of comedy's brightest lights, who had once shone so brilliantly together, went to their graves without ever reconciling. The laughter they shared was ultimately eclipsed by the silence that followed. A heartbreaking reminder that in the world of fame and fortune, sometimes the deepest friendships are the most fragile.